the CIA's journal on themselves. And there's nothing on Helen Coder's interest in UFOs in that journal. Helen Coder in 1961 was pushing publicly for this, for open congressional hearings on UFOs. How about that? A year later, just before he was scheduled to go to Congress, he was going to go to Congress in April of '62. In February of that year, wrote a letter to the NICAP board and said, I can't do any of this. We're really being unfair to the Air Force. They're doing all they can do, and I hereby resign from the organization. That was in Roscoe Helen Coder. So it might look that the cover-up was very effective. The problem with covering up this phenomenon, as I have found, is that whoever's operating these objects, they never get the memo that they're not supposed to exist, so they keep coming back. And during the 60s, we had another major wave of these sightings in this country and worldwide, actually. And this is a photograph over here from 1965. It's one of many great photographs. One of three that a California highway inspector took. And if you could see underneath this object on the ground, it looks as though the ground is being disturbed. It looks like that to me. That photograph has its own history. It went through a period where people said, no, fake. The prevailing consensus now is that it is not fake, and I'm of that opinion myself. What happened during the 60s, though, lots of sightings. And then finally, it looked like NICAP might succeed, bringing this to Congress, getting open congressional hearings. It looked like it might happen, except it didn't happen. And the Air Force very deftly kept the initiative, and instead of giving it to Congress, they gave it to the University of Colorado. Handpicked, and that man on the bottom left, Edward Condon, ran the study. Condon was absolutely dead set against the topic as being anything serious right from the beginning. His number 2 guy in the study was an ex-CIA guy named Robert Lowe. And during the course of this study in the late 60s, there was a major mutiny among a number of the Colorado professors who decided, you know what, it looks like the game is rigged, because a lot of them started to become believers. Once you start looking at the evidence, we have a history of this. You get a study started and people involved suddenly think, wow, it's actually a pretty good case. They were all fired midway through. The report finally came out, and Condon wrote the conclusion, said, nothing to this, the Air Force should drop Project Blue Book, which is its investigative body, which the Air Force promptly did. And of course, I think this was the point all along. Oh, by the way, the top left is Air Force consultant Alan Hynek explaining that recent sightings in Michigan were the result of swamp gas. That didn't go over well for the media. Condon's defining quote on this was that nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years that has added to scientific knowledge, and that on that pretext the Air Force got out. My argument is that this elimination of Blue Book, which admittedly was kind of a joke of an operation by then, nevertheless was an undermining of democratic rule, because, Blue Book may have been a joke, but it was our joke. It was our government body that we paid for. Back in those days, if you saw what you thought was a UFO, you could at least go to some responsible government agency, the Air Force, and theoretically they'd be charged with investigating it. Okay, typically it went into the proverbial circular file, but anyway, they were supposed to. And Blue Book really was the door through which we tried to pry this topic open. After 1969, that door ceased to exist. And really what I would suggest is that this is the closing off of the bridge between civilians and the military on this topic, so we kind of were shut out. There was a memo at the same time, classified at the time, that said, not really a big deal that Blue Book's closed, because if there are any UFO reports that have to do with national security, well, they were never part of the Blue Book system anyway. So an admission that the actual serious reports were, outside that system. But once again, even though these things are debunked, they don't go away. In the 1970s, let me just jump a hope here, a new Hope Freedom of Information Act absolutely became the new lever at the time for citizens to try to get secrets out of the government, and it looked for a little while there that it might succeed. At the same time, we started getting a lot of leaks coming out from the classified world relating to such crazy ideas as crashes of UFOs, the storage of dead alien bodies at places like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. A lot of these came out. And at first researchers thought, well, that's kind of crazy, but then you start getting 10 and 20 and 30 and 50 of these stories, and you start to wonder. There was, as I argue in my new book, an apparent counterattack by the intelligence community in the form of active disinformation, muddying up the field. We certainly know for sure that there were Air Force disinformation efforts underway on this. That's actually not a matter of argument. So the question is, where is the actual truth of what was being studied by them in these alleged crash retrieval stories? It's a fascinating story. In the 1980s, the leaks get even more intense. We start getting stories coming out even before the world learned of Area 51. There were leaks coming out from that area in Nevada talking about exotic technology, vastly beyond what we're supposed to have officially. More stories of aliens being kept in secret places. And, of course, what does one do with these stories? It's very difficult to confirm them, obviously. But the problem is, it's like when you see all this smoke, you got to start wondering, well, is there fire? And a lot of, a growing number, shall we say, of researchers started looking into this. These topics were very divisive at the time, to say nothing of the growing emphasis on alien abductions, or alleged abductions, also, which became a big, big, big issue in the 1980s. You know, prior to the 1980s, people had heard claims from time to time of people who said, yeah, I think I was taken by these creatures. But that was always considered kind of a hardly ever happened, and only if you were unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Suddenly in the 1980s, researchers started to argue, no, it doesn't look like that. It looks like it's a much more widespread phenomenon. And of course, as you could imagine, that met with a great deal of resistance from more established researchers. At the same time, during the 80s, during the Reagan years, we had major restrictions on the Freedom of Information Act, starting in 1982 with an executive order that took the wind out of the sails of freedom of information, essentially gutted it. At that time, NORAD became exempted, totally exempted from freedom of information, which it remains to this day. And essentially, the flow of documents that were coming out relating to this topic went to a trickle, and it remains very, very limited. You can go to the National Archives at College Park, Maryland. I've done that, and you can hunt around for these documents, and there are things to be found. But the declassification process is not keeping up, not even remotely, with what the archive holds. There's a recent book came out called Blank Spots on the Map by a British researcher named Nigel, name escapes me. It's a great book, Blank Spots on the Map. He argued, he said at least current studies now are suggesting that literally more than 50% of all government documents in the United States are classified, which means basically if you're an archivist or researcher trying to get the history of your country, that most of your history is secret from you. I mean, think about that. Wow. What kind of world are we living in? In such a situation, is it possible that some pretty nasty secrets are being kept from you? I think so, yes. We have people saying, oh, it's impossible to keep secrets in today's